We like to imagine that modern trade, stock markets, shipping containers, global supply chains was born just decades or centuries ago. That ancient people lived simple, local lives, trading beads for grain in dusty marketplaces. But what if I told you that over 4,000 years ago, in the cradle of civilization, humans created something shockingly advanced, something that looks suspiciously like a modern economy? What if I told you that long before Wall Street, long before digital banking, long before money, Mesopotamia had already invented the blueprint? What if a world of contracts, credit, receipts, international trade routes, corporate-style institutions, and even merchant risk management existed millennia before anyone used coins? Today, we uncover a forgotten truth. Mesopotamia didn't just trade goods. Mesopotamia engineered the world's first economic system, one powerful enough to build cities, topple kingdoms, and reshape human civilization. But here's the mystery. How did people trade in a world with no coins, scarce metals, no standardized currency, and constant danger from raids, storms, political collapse, and famine? The answer lies buried in clay tablets. Tablets that reveal a system far more sophisticated and far more familiar than you might expect. Stay with me because the story you're about to hear rewrites what you think you know about early human trade and exposes patterns we still repeat today. To understand trade in Mesopotamia, we need to step back to around 3,500 BCE, in the land between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Here, in fertile plains that flood unpredictably, humanity built something unprecedented. The world's first cities. Uruk, Uar, Lagash, Eridu, Babylon. These weren't tiny villages. These were urban centers of tens of thousands. Massive populations for their time, requiring constant supplies of food, resources, and labor. But there was a problem. Mesopotamia, despite its fertile soil, was missing almost everything else. No timber, no metals, no precious stone, limited stone for building, limited grazing land. The region was rich in grain, clay, and labor, and poor in nearly everything else required for monumental construction, bureaucracy, weapons, art, and status. So how did they compensate? They built a trading system that spanned thousands of kilometers, reaching into Anatolia, Persia, the Indus Valley, Arabia, and even the Mediterranean. But here's the twist. They did all this before money, before coins, before weights were standardized, before nations as we know them existed. It was a world of innovation born out of necessity. And it required three revolutionary inventions that you might think belong to the modern age. The first recorded financial contracts. The first corporate-style trading institutions. The world's earliest writing system, created not to tell stories, but to track trade. Yes, writing was invented because of trade. And behind this rising economic engine, several powerful groups shaped Mesopotamian commerce. Temple institutions, palace bureaucracies, private merchants called tamkaru, caravan leaders and long-distance traders, agents, brokers, managers, and record-keepers. This wasn't primitive barter. This was a complex economy with regulations, credit, and international negotiations. But it didn't start that way. Let's trace the origins. Rewind to around 3800 to 3000 BCE, the Ubaid and Uruk periods. Small farming communities are expanding, irrigating more land, producing more grain than they need. Surplus, the fuel of civilization. But surplus grain created problems. How do you store it? How do you distribute it? How do you track who owes what? How do you exchange it for missing resources? The solution wasn't simple barter. Barter collapses in large populations. You can't match what you have with what someone needs perfectly. So the temples stepped in. Temples weren't just religious centers. They were economic hubs, storage facilities, redistribution networks, and administrative powerhouses. Temples collected grain, fish, wool, labor, livestock, and they distributed food rations, tools, raw materials, land use rights, work assignments. To manage this massive flow, they invented something revolutionary. Clay tokens. Small clay shapes representing goods. A cone for grain, a sphere for oil, a disc for livestock. Tokens were sealed inside clay envelopes called bulli, the world's first sealed economic documents. But people needed to know what was inside the envelope without breaking it open. So they pressed the tokens into the clay before sealing it. The impression of the token on the outside became more important than the token inside. Within a few generations, someone realized the tokens didn't need to be inside at all. The marks themselves were enough. And just like that, writing was born, cuneiform, invented to record trade. This turning point enabled a new level of economic organization. Temples recorded inventory, debts, deliveries, rations, contracts, worker obligations. The system worked so well that it expanded far beyond the temple. Soon, long-distance trade routes emerged. And this is where the story begins to accelerate. By 2500 BCE, Mesopotamia had transformed into the world's first economic superpower. Not because of what it had, but because of what it needed. Let's break down how people traded on 3 levels. 1. Local trade within cities. Inside city walls, trade operated through markets selling goods and food, specialized craftsmen exchanging products, temple rations distributed to workers, labor for grain agreements. But the backbone was credit-based trade. Yes, credit existed in Mesopotamia nearly 4,200 years before banks. Clay tablets functioned as ayus, receipts, redeemable credits, payment agreements. If a worker received barley or silver, it was recorded. If a craftsman delivered goods, it was recorded. If someone borrowed grain for planting season, it was recorded. Everything was tracked. 2. Regional trade. Between cities and regions. Cities specialized. Textiles and wool. Lagash, agricultural exports. Grain. Eridu, fish. Sapar, bronze tools and weapons. They exchanged goods through caravans, river boats, and donkeys. Each city-state competed fiercely. Trade wasn't just commercial, it was political. 3. Long-distance international trade. This is where Mesopotamians truly innovated. Timber from Lebanon, traveled by river and sea. Copper from Oman and Anatolia, was transported by caravans over deserts and mountains. Tin from Afghanistan and Iran, required dangerous journeys across hostile territories. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, was so rare and expensive that temples used it for royal and divine imagery. Gold from Egypt and Nubia, arrived through complex diplomatic trading relationships. Cloth and wool from Sumer, were exported in astonishing quantities. Mesopotamia became the middleman for international trade. Let's break down how Mesopotamian trade operated on the ground step by step. This is where the story becomes truly surprising. 1. Contracts, the first financial instruments. Clay tablets served as legally binding documents. A typical contract included names of both parties, goods or services exchanged, payment terms, witnesses, seals, penalty clauses. Some contracts even included profit-sharing agreements, shipping risk clauses, multi-year repayment plans. This is essentially the earliest form of corporate finance. 2. The role of the Tomkaru long-distance merchants. These were not simple traders. They were business managers, risk-takers, negotiators, investors, representatives of temples, palaces, or private families. The Tomkaru might borrow silver from a temple, use it to buy wool, exchange the wool for copper in Anatolia, bring back the copper, sell it, repay the loan with interest, keep the profit. This sounds dangerously close to a venture capital model, doesn't it? 3. Caravans and transport. Caravans traveled in groups of up to 300 donkeys, across deserts and mountain passes, with armed escorts, carrying textiles, wool, grain, metals, stones, and luxury goods. Crew included caravan leaders, merchants, scribes, guards, animal handlers. These were high-risk missions. Bandits, weather, conflict, and illness constantly threatened them. Yet tablets show caravans returned massive profit. 4. Risk management, the birth of insurance. Some tablets specify, if the goods are lost to thieves or storms, repayment obligations vanish. If the merchant dies on the journey, the family owes nothing. If part of the cargo arrives damaged, shared losses apply. This is primitive insurance. Over 4,000 years ago. 5. Silver as proto-money. Even before coins, silver became a standard of value. It wasn't minted or shaped into coins. It existed as weighed pieces, measured in shekels. But no economic system scales forever. By 2200 BCE, something began to break. Several factors collided. 1. Climate change. A severe drought, lasting centuries, struck the Near East. Canals dried. Crops failed. Rivers became unreliable. 2. Over-centralization. Temples accumulated too much power. Palaces attempted to regulate trade heavily. Merchants depended on loans they couldn't repay. 3. Trade route disruptions. Nomadic tribes blocked caravan paths. Neighboring kingdoms collapsed. Copper networks disintegrated. Supplies dried up. 4. Internal inequality and debt. Common people took grain loans. Bad harvests made repayment impossible. Debt slavery emerged on a massive scale. Economic pressure became unbearable. And then came the final blow, the Akkadian collapse, 2200 to 2100 BCE. The world's first empire, Akkad, fell amidst famine, invasion, and economic breakdown. Trade networks shattered. Cities depopulated. Workshops closed. Temples could no longer support their workers. Caravan routes were abandoned. A system built on trade collapsed because the environment changed faster than the economy could adapt. Sound familiar? Mesopotamia didn't give up. It rebuilt again and again. Under the UR3 dynasty, the Old Babylonian Kingdom, the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, trade revived in cycles, each time with more regulation, more bureaucracy, and more dependence on foreign supplies. But every revival carried seeds of strain. 1. Increasing debt crises. So many citizens fell into debt that rulers repeatedly issued. Clean slates, debt cancellations. Kings like Amisaduqa of Babylon wiped personal debts to avoid social collapse. Sound like modern recession bailouts? 2. Overextension and bureaucracy explosion. As temples expanded, record-keeping ballooned. Administrative overhead grew. Taxes increased. Trade required more permits and approvals. The system became rigid. When flexibility dies, trade dies with it. 3. Dependence on foreign resources. Mesopotamia needed metal, wood, stone, luxury imports. When neighbors collapsed or warfare cut routes, Mesopotamia suffered instantly. They were globalized. Long before globalization existed, dependency creates fragility. 4. Attempts to regulate trade. Some kings tried price controls. Some tried to fix weights and measures. Some tried to regulate merchant profits. None of it worked long-term. Trade is like water. It flows around obstacles or stops entirely. So how did people trade in Mesopotamia? The answer is far richer than simple exchange. They traded with contracts, credit, corporate institutions, risk management, long-distance networks, bureaucratic oversight, standardized accounting, merchant finance systems, administrative records, international diplomacy. Mesopotamia created the world's first economic engine. And the story of that engine, its rise, its brilliance, its fragility, its collapse, is a warning for every modern economy. If this deep dive into the world's first economy opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe for more history-driven investigations, and share this video with someone who still thinks ancient trade was primitive. Because history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And sometimes the oldest stories explain the most modern problems. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.